After 6 beautiful period piece gothic horror films in the Hammer Dracula franchise, it's time to take the character and this epic story to the groovy 1970s. Today we're talking about Dracula A.D. 1972, which came out in, well, 1972, and was directed by Alan Gibson and stars Peter Cushing, Stephanie Beacham, Christopher Neame, Caroline Munro, and of course, Christopher Lee.
You who witness it must swear before the name of the devil to keep it secret.
Okay, the title suggests 1972, but we're actually starting in 1872 with Christopher Lee as Dracula in the opening scene. That's pretty unusual. These movies usually wait a long time for that reveal. And we've already got what appears to be a final showdown between Dracula and Van Helsing. Now, if you've been keeping track with this series, we actually haven't seen Peter Cushing as Van Helsing since the second film in the series, Brides of Dracula, and we haven't seen him go against Dracula since the original film. So this has been a long time coming. So welcome, Peter Cushing. It is so good to have you back in this series, but this appears to be a reworked new version of the end of the first film. So it seems like we're kind of throwing out the past continuity, where the two of them are actually fighting on a racing coach, which is actually pretty cool. It kind of reminds me of Ichabod Crane fighting the Headless Horseman on a racing coach in Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow. But don't worry, everybody. Dracula gets defeated by Van Helsing by getting a wheel stuck into his chest, I guess is what's happening here. It's not super clear. Okay, that makes sense. Yep, he pulled it out. The wheel acted as a stake. And in kind of a cheap, not so cool looking effect, Dracula decomposes. So I guess we're done with Dracula for this movie. What's the rest of this film going to be about? Oh, wait, hang on. We've got a Dracula underling coming in to save some of the ashes and Dracula's ring. So you know a resurrection is right around the corner. Right as this dude is burying the ashes by a church for some reason, we get this really cool transition into the 1970s. I actually really love this. I think it's super well done with the plane going and the 70s music hitting. This is actually the only part in the movie where I'm going to be happy to hear this incredibly dated 1970s music. A big reason they did put it in present day is because of the success of Count Yorga Vampire, a really good film that came out in 1970 about a very classical gothic vampire in present day 1970. That movie is so good, much better than this one, I'll tell you that. And in case you're confused on whether or not this actually does take place in the 70s, we get this super groovy party scene. Look at these partying teens. We got a band there playing live music. The band here is actually a real band. They're called Stoneground. And I gotta say, just based on this film, I don't think they're that good. I'm not gonna be buying their records anytime soon. Oh, okay. These two are really enjoying the music. Well done, dude. You really know how to satisfy a woman. Wait, this dude's pants were up the whole time? I guess this party was less crazy than I thought. So here we've got our group of partying young people. I pointed out several times in this review series that I've been doing, covering all the Hammer Dracula films, if you didn't know, and this is your first one, that at a certain point, this series became like a slasher franchise. We get our fun-loving young people in every movie, and this one is really driving that point home more than any of them. I mean, this is like a full-on slasher film, and here's our characters. They're, at least at this point, not super interesting to me, but hey, Caroline Munro is in here, legendary cult film actress, love Caroline Munro. I think the only other Hammer film she did was Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter, where she got a bigger role, which is good, but hey, she's got a little part in this movie, and that's cool. And now this one dude who looks suspiciously like the guy that saved Dracula's ashes 100 years ago, keep your eyes on that guy, is now suggesting, hey, let's go to this abandoned church and do a black mass and try to summon the devil. That just sounds like fun.
Do you really think it'll work, Johnny? No harm in trying.
I wouldn't count on that. By the way, that's Christopher Neame as Johnny Alucard. Wow, that's an interesting last name. I bet that's not going to become important later in the film. And over here, you've got Stephanie Beacham as Jessica Van Helsing. I wonder who her great-grandfather is going to be. If you recognize her, it's probably because she starred in And Now the Screaming Starts, a great Amicus haunted house film, also with Peter Cushing. A much better film than this one, I'll tell you that. Well, okay, we got Peter Cushing back in here. Did Van Helsing time travel? Is he immortal? No, this is actually the grandson grandson of the original Van Helsing, who, by the way, in this movie is named Lawrence Van Helsing. I don't know why they changed it from the traditional Abraham Van Helsing that it was. It almost feels like this feels a lot like when Victor Frankenstein got renamed Henry in the original Boris Karloff Frankenstein. Just super weird name change for no reason at all. But yeah, this is his grandson, Lorimer Van Helsing, who is actually the grandfather of Jessica Van Helsing. He was actually written to be her father, but Peter Cushing had just dealt with the loss of his wife, and his horrible grief that he went through in that period aged him considerably, and they felt like he couldn't convincingly just be her father anymore. He had to be her grandfather. I don't know that it really mattered, to be honest, but that's the decision they made. But okay, after catching up with Van Helsing a bit, let's go out with our friends to do this black mass in this abandoned church. One inspiration for the story of this film was actually inspired by the real-life case of the Highgate vampire. The Highgate vampire is an urban legend of a vampire that resided in Highgate Cemetery in London in the late 1960s, early 1970s. One of the more famous events that took place around this is when a group of young people did come into this cemetery, desecrate a grave, open it, and drive a wooden cross stake through the heart of this corpse. The police actually found that this all happened. Very creepy. There's a lot of other stories around this that are very, very interesting, involving multiple sightings of this vampire walking around the cemetery. Two occult investigators who, in a very high-profile way, did a lot of vampire hunting around this cemetery and had a whole rivalry around which one would kill the vampire first. There was even an entire mob that came into this cemetery hunting down this vampire. It was like this mass hysteria kind of a thing, or a real vampire. You be the judge. It's a very interesting story. Not the point of this video, but I do recommend reading about it. By the way, these characters, I'm not sold on any of them at this point in the movie. They're really annoying. They're obnoxious. They're constantly joking, but never funny at all.
All right. Don't get your knickers in a twist. It was a gag, I tell you.
There never seems to be any kind of personality coming out of them that is remotely interesting or charming at all. But here we are. They're going to do that. By the way, this church, it looks a lot like the church in Taste the Blood of Dracula. I don't know for sure if it's the same set, but I would not be surprised. This is where Christopher Neame is going full ham.
That's it. Like the silken shroud.
He delivers the biggest performance probably in these Hammer Dracula films up to this point.
I demand an audience with his satanic majesty, Count Dracula. Oh, hear me!
I mean, he's out Ralph Batesing Ralph Bates when he does his black mass to summon Dracula in Taste the Blood of Dracula. And it seems clear that he specifically wants to involve Jessica Van Helsing in his ritual, asking her to be baptized in blood. She doesn't want to do it, but Carolyn Monroe as Laura is down. She is down to get crazy. So she comes up. And this is normally in this kind of movie where she might get blood sacrificed or he might stab her. But instead, he cuts his own wrist, bleeds and bleeds and bleeds into this cup. Look at that blood. That looks absolutely insane. I don't know what that looks like, but it does not look like blood. But he fills up a cup with it and just dumps it on her, which is weird. I don't know why the way you would summon Dracula is just by dumping your own blood on someone else, but understandably she freaks out. Everybody else does too, and they just leave. They just abandon her, and like, your friend just got a bunch of disgusting blood spilled on her by this crazy dude, and you're not gonna help her? You're not gonna get her out of there? These are terrible friends. In addition to being obnoxious, annoying, and not interesting, they are terrible friends.
All right. Don't get your knickers in a twist. It was a gag, I tell you.
But we soon see the plot reason she got left behind, and that's because Dracula needs some food. You see, during this whole ritual, you could see the ground outside like breathing, which is really cool. And no doubt that is the area where Dracula's ashes were buried 100 years ago. And after she gets the blood dripped on her, Dracula does rise from the dead. Awesome. It took a while to get here, but we're finally here.
I did it. I summoned you.
It was my will.
Ooh, that's a cool line. Like, you can't take credit for this. I made you do it. I made this happen. Alucard seems totally fine after bleeding a whole pint out of his wrist. I guess if you bleed for Dracula, he'll reward you by not dying. Unless you're Ralph Bates, then you will die. I don't know. The lore here doesn't make a lot of sense. This is actually a really cool biting sequence. I mean, Carolyn Monroe, she seems like a perfect actress to be in a Hammer Dracula film. She makes for a great Dracula victim when he comes up from drinking her blood. He looks looks awesome with the blood dripping down and the red eyes. It's great. But don't get used to any of this because you're not going to see Carolyn Monroe in the movie again, and you're not going to see another Dracula bite. This is it. Now we catch back up with our friends as they discuss their incredibly stupid and selfish decision to leave Laura behind.
Johnny gets his kicks out of scaring people.
You just watched him bleed out of his wrist. He just likes scaring people. Why are these characters not more freaked out by what's going on? But now we start getting into what's actually going to be a big focus of this film, and that's cops investigating vampires. Doesn't seem like a super exciting theme for a Dracula movie, but here we are. This dude talks about how they did find Laura's body mutilated in the cemetery. So Carolyn Monroe is dead out of this movie. I think that's a big mistake. Huge missed opportunity. Carolyn Monroe would have been a great vampire bride to add to the creepy factor. Everything would have been better about this movie with vampire Carolyn Monroe going around. But no, we don't get that. She is dead. And now we get this cop guy investigating possible occult murders. He goes to question Van Helsing, where Van Helsing delivers a lot of speeches about how there is evil in the world and maybe this was done by a vampire.
Vampirism. You're joking, but there are dark corners and horrors almost impossible to imagine.
And it's right about this point where I start realizing, man, we're an hour into this movie and we have barely got any Dracula. Like, Dracula got resurrected, but we haven't seen him since. And there's a whole lot of cops walking around questioning people. It's not great. Van Helsing starts to figure out that maybe his granddaughter's friend, Johnny Alucard, is actually a servant of the ancient vampire Dracula that his grandfather fought. And we get this hilarious scene where he's treating Alucard's name like a puzzle, like trying to figure out, what could this name mean? Like, dude, haven't you seen Son of Dracula with Lon Chaney Jr.? Alucard means Dracula. Finally, Dracula shows back up in the movie for some quick exposition with Johnny, where he explains his goal in the film.
I have returned to destroy the house of Van Helsing forever, the old through the young.
So while Johnny keeps bringing him victims, different girls from the friend group, he really just wants Jessica. And we get this funny part where Johnny is like begging Dracula to make him a vampire. Apparently that's why he summoned him.
I demand the power of immortality!
Oh, all right, I can't say no to you. So he finally gives in. I don't know, watching Dracula get talked into something kind of takes away his power a little bit, but whatever. I'm also questioning why Johnny has to go out and get Jessica for Dracula at all. Why can't Dracula go do it himself? Why does he only stand around in this church for the entire movie? I don't remember any exposition being delivered for, like, Dracula cannot leave these grounds. That wouldn't make any sense. I don't think that's the case. I feel like it's budgetary and they just got Christopher Lee for like 1 or 2 filming days and just filmed all his stuff in this one place and then they were quickly done. I don't know, just what I'm suspecting. Johnny is now a vampire and totally failing to find Jessica, bringing Dracula some random victims, but at one point Jessica's boyfriend shows up at her house in order to bring her to the pub where they hang out to meet up with all the friends to get their stories straight, I guess, so they can cover up the fact that a bunch of their friends are getting murdered. And if you're wondering, wait, Jessica has a boyfriend? Yeah, she does. Boring Boyfriend is the only name I know him by. He is in a fair amount of this movie and never makes an impression, no personality, no charisma. As a character, he just completely sucks.
All right, don't get your knickers in a twist.
But he brings her back to this pub and she figures out, oh, he's a vampire too. Pretty much everybody is now. Whoa, this is actually cool. Sparks are flying out of his hand when he touches a crucifix. I've actually never seen that before. And Johnny successfully brings Jessica to Dracula. But don't worry, Van Helsing is on the case to save his granddaughter. Okay, running might not be the best approach for a man of your age. You might want to get a cab. Oh, wait, it's a character from Jessica's friend group that we all completely forgot about. I have no idea what her name is, but she shows up to deliver Van Helsing the information of Johnny's address because she's the only one that's actually been to Johnny's place, so you can imagine why.
But I went there once. For kicks. It was so weird.
So Van Helsing goes there to have a showdown with Johnny, and wait, is that a pool table pushed up in the corner of the room? Okay, maybe you're trying to play billiards on hard mode with a real limitation on what kind of angles you can get on your shots. I don't know, seems less fun to me. But Van Helsing is able to defeat Vampire Johnny by shoving him in the shower. Yes, it's a killer shower. Killer shower. That's actually it's a pretty good idea for a slasher movie. Hey, write that down. Now it's time for our final showdown, and this part cracks me up where he's building basically a tiger trap for Dracula, a hole in the ground with spikes coming up, like it's Swiss Family Robinson or something.
The old tiger, he'll come along here like this, and he'll start to circle a pit. And then
I think you better just tell me, Francis, not show me.
And he comes into the church just in time to stop Dracula from biting his granddaughter. Yes, we're continuing to get no other vampire bites in this movie. And Dracula actually gets this really cool line, much inspired by the Bram Stoker novel.
You would play your brains against mine. Against me, who has commanded nations.
Commanded nations. Yeah, that's a cool line. It's too bad we can barely see him as he delivers it, though.
You would play your brains against mine. Against me, who has commanded nations.
And now it's time for their fight, where they run around to this absolutely terrible music. So I'd only seen this movie a couple of times before rewatching it for this review, and the first time I watched it, I hated the film, much because of this scene. Just watching them run around to this stupid music, like the finally reuniting Peter Cushing Van Helsing and Christopher Lee Dracula, all the way from the 1958 classic. They're back together to this ridiculous groovy 70s thing that doesn't fit these characters at all. I hate it. And Van Helsing defeats Dracula with his Swiss Family Robinson trap. You know, it's kind of cool that he did all this prep work in advance, and he actually uses holy water to get Dracula off guard to get him to fall in. You know, it feels like Van Helsing knew that he can't really stand up against Dracula, so he's going to need to do a lot of preparation, set up some traps. I kind of like that idea. I still think using like a typical trap for tigers or bears for Dracula it's kind of funny. All right, Jessica is saved, and that's our movie. So let's go ahead and rate Dracula AD 1972. Now for atmosphere, I'm going to give this a 4, and that's because the church is actually a pretty cool atmosphere, and out in the graveyard you get all this fog, and I like that kind of stuff. Nothing else about the atmosphere of this movie works for me at all. It's just modern day streets of London. It's all very brightly lit. It doesn't feel dark, ominous, well shot at all. Now, this movie I mentioned is directed by Alan Gibson. I believe, if I remember right, the only other film he directed for Hammer is the next Dracula film, The Satanic Rites of Dracula. And based on those two, I don't think he's a very good director. I think he's the weakest director to ever work on these Hammer Dracula films, so that's kind of a shame. Now for characters, I'm gonna give this, I'll give it a 4, really just because of Dracula and Van Helsing. I think if not for Peter Cushing specifically, because he by far has more screen time than Christopher Lee by like 20 times, this movie would be basically unwatchable. Peter Cushing is the only thing keeping it afloat for me. I mean, he's got some exposition scenes where he delivers like what vampires are, which is a ridiculous thing to include in your 7th film in the series. Like, everyone in the audience knows what vampires are. But Peter Cushing makes it work, and the dialogue is actually pretty cool.
Vampires are the living dead. They have no lifespan, well, not as we use the term. Like the phoenix, they die, only to live again.
Now, I think Christopher Lee's really good here. He's just in very little of the film. But I don't like any of these other characters at all. I think they're all so boring.
All right, don't get your knickers in a twist.
I mean, Johnny Alucard isn't boring, but he's hammy and silly, and I don't particularly like him in the movie, but he's all right, I guess. Now for story, I'm going to give this a 2. I think it is the worst story in the series. Like, you would think them setting it in the 1970s, like, that's a big change, that would really allow them to really switch things up, do something different. But they don't. I would say they switch things up less than like any of the other sequels in the series. It is such a standard, boring story. They change the setting, but nothing about the plot. It's a very boring, standard vampire movie. You've seen it a million times, even before this. I don't even mean since this, before this. I mean, there's just nothing interesting going on here. And then for horror, I'm going to give it a 5 because I do really like Christopher Lee in it. He has a fair amount of dialogue, not as much as he had in Scars of Dracula, but in more than a lot of the other sequels. I think the dialogue is actually pretty good. He's got some good lines. Clearly, I think he probably knew that he was not making a good movie, but he decided to make the best of it. And he really, really does. He delivers everything with a lot of energy. This movie is actually really squeaky clean, which is another weird part about setting it in the 70s. You would think you'd want to make it more edgy, more dangerous for the kids today or something like that, but they don't. I mean, it's very clean. It's not particularly violent. It's not sexy. There's just not much here. All in all, I'm going to give it a 4. Now, I've seen this movie 3 times. The first time, like I mentioned, I hated it. The second time, I thought I was a little harsh on it. I liked it a little better. Watching it for this review, it did absolutely nothing for me. I I don't think it's very good.
All right, don't get your knickers in a twist.
So that's my review, but what do you think about Dracula AD 1972? Let me know down in the comments below. Let's talk about this film. And if you want to hang out with me more, you can click this video right over here, or this playlist of all of my other Hammer Dracula reviews. I've reviewed all the previous ones, so this is the 7th review in the series. And hit the like button and the subscribe button if you haven't yet. Thank you all so much. I'll see you next time.